Maybe you've heard someone say that Israel is an apartheid state, that Israel has a policy of segregating and oppressing the minority population within its borders, like South Africa once did. Maybe you've been so outraged by this information that you have considered joining the BDS movement, the effort to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel until it ends its alleged racist policies. I don't blame you. Apartheid is a great evil and deserves to be fought wherever we find it. But here's the thing, you won't find apartheid in the state of Israel. So, I'll put it bluntly. The BDS movement is a slick propaganda effort built on lies. I think I have the credibility to make this claim. Having grown up in South Africa and having spent a fair amount of time in Israel, I know what apartheid is and what it is not. My parents were raised under real apartheid, where blacks were, by law, separated from whites at every level, from education to drinking fountains. Blacks couldn't vote, couldn't own land, couldn't live next to or use the same transportation system as whites. I remember my father telling me about how my grandfather was kicked and humiliated in public by a young white boy. All he was permitted to say was, "Please stop, little boss." That was the world my family lived in. That was the world of apartheid South Africa. But in Israel, the law is colorblind. Israeli Arabs have the same rights as Israeli Jews. They ride the same buses, study in the same schools, and are treated in the same hospitals. Arabs are elected to Israel's parliament, serve as judges, and fight in the Israeli military. On my first trip to Israel, the group I was with had a Jewish tour guide and an Arab bus driver. Imagine our surprise having heard that Israel is an apartheid state. This would have been inconceivable in apartheid South Africa. All these things would be self-evident to anyone who did any kind of actual research, or even better, visited Israel, something I encourage everyone to do. BDS doesn't want you to research or visit Israel. It depends on the ignorance of its audience. Sadly, on American college campuses, BDS has a significant presence. It succeeds by playing on the good intentions of good people through deliberate deception. In short, they lie. And lies really make me angry because lies empower evil. Lies about blacks empowered apartheid in South Africa. Lies about Jews made the Holocaust possible. And lies about Israel are misleading a lot of good-hearted young people into opposing the only country in the entire Middle East that doesn't segregate and oppress its minority population. Just ask the next Egyptian Copt or Iraqi Christian you meet on campus. So the question people should really be asking is, what does the BDS movement want? The answer is simple. They want to destroy Israel. They can't do it militarily, so they try to do it through lies. They say that Jews have no historic claim to Israel. Lie. They say that Israel treats its Arabs as second-class citizens. Lie. They say that Israel doesn't want peace with its Arab neighbors. Lie. If you tell lies and you tell them often enough, people who don't know the truth start to believe them. The BDS movement's leaders barely tried to hide this charade. They will lie and say that they only want a Palestinian state living side by side with Israel. And then they say this: we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Ending the occupation doesn't mean anything if it doesn't mean upending the Jewish state itself. That's from Omar Boguti, a founder of BDS. Boguti lives in Israel, so you might expect that he said this from inside an Israeli prison like Nelson Mandela during South Africa apartheid. You would be wrong. Boguti is a PhD student at Israel's Tel Aviv University, where he enjoys the same rights as every Israeli. My parents could only dream of that kind of freedom. Is Israel a perfect country? No. There are as many perfect countries as there are perfect people. But to call it an apartheid state is not only an insult to the only democracy in the Middle East and the only country with equal rights for all its minorities, it's also an insult to the actual victims of apartheid, like my parents and all those who suffered under it. I'm Olga Meshoe for Prager University.
If Democrats and Republicans can agree on anything, it's stagnating wages. Median family income dropped from $57,790 in 2000 to $56,516 in 2015. To address the problem, some have pushed to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But only 1.7% of the 77 million hourly employees even earn the minimum wage, and just 395,000 are over the age of 25 and earning entry-level wages for entry-level work, like cashiers and waiters. What activists don't tell you is that raising the entry-level wage increases labor costs for small business owners, making it harder for them to keep employees and hire new ones. This makes it harder for younger employees to gain the skills they need to climb the career ladder and earn much higher incomes. Instead of concentrating on raising the floor for low-skilled jobs, we should be focusing on helping people get the skills to raise the ceiling of what people can make. The real fight should be for true middle-class jobs that earn $50,000 or more a year, what we call the fight for 50. These jobs allow people to save more money and better support their families. There are going to be 2.5 million of these middle-skilled job openings next year. These career opportunities require more than a high school degree, but less than a 4-year college degree, boasting an average salary of $50,000 per year. These jobs include automotive technicians, nurses, and plumbers. While entry-level employees don't have the necessary skills to succeed right away in higher-paying roles, they often learn them quickly. One of our most famous politicians started out by scooping ice cream at a Baskin-Robbins and made it all the way to the Oval Office in the White House. In other words, the entry-level wage should be thought of as a training wage, which employees with few skills can use to prepare for a $50,000 a year or more career. Let's raise wages by putting Americans back to work and fighting for $50,000.
I have no self-esteem. I'm not saying I dislike myself or that I have a problem with my self-image, and I don't have low self-esteem. I'm just saying that I have no self-esteem at all. Why? For the same reason that I have no pet unicorns. Self-esteem is a fantasy. It's a meaningless fabrication that exists only in your imagination. The dictionary defines esteem this way: to regard with admiration. Self-esteem, therefore, means to regard yourself with admiration. But is that how we should see ourselves? If someone asked you who you admire, would you really want to answer, well, I admire myself? Would that be a good thing? I would say no, emphatically. I was hardly a precocious kid, but I think I realized this self-esteem thing was a racket as far back as junior high. I remember when the guidance counselor at my school handed out a worksheet and asked us to rate our self-esteem on a scale of 1 to 10. Meanwhile, kids in China were learning silly things like math and science. Now we're bankrupt and they own the country, but at least we all feel pretty good about ourselves. In any case, there we were, facing the important task of arbitrarily quantifying our egos. When I asked my teacher why I should have high self-esteem, she said, because you're special. When I asked why I was special, she said, because you're you. I found this an odd statement at the time, coming as it was from the woman who had just given me a D on my last math quiz. Most of my classmates, though, quickly jotted down 9s and 10s. Incidentally, some of them would grow up to become unemployed alcoholics, but I'm guessing if they could take that test again, they'd score themselves exactly the same. See, that's the whole point of self-esteem, to be proud of yourself even when there's no reason to be proud of yourself. Of course, apologists will claim that self-esteem is simply about confidence, and that you need confidence to succeed in life. Okay, but if self-esteem is simply about confidence, then why don't we just call it confidence? Because confidence must be earned. A student is confident about doing well on a test if he studies for it. An athlete is confident on the field if he practices. A singer is confident in her abilities if she, in fact, has abilities. Self-esteem, on the other hand, can be defined as unearned confidence. The person with high self-esteem, also known as a narcissist, feels good about himself on the basis of nothing. We may ask him, "Why do you esteem yourself?" And his learned response will be, "Because I'm me." Like a modern-day narcissist, he can't see the world outside the window because he's too busy whispering sweet nothings to his reflection in the glass. In a saner, less confused time, people saw it the opposite way. It didn't matter how you felt about yourself, it mattered what you did. Funny, that's what my parents taught me. I remember one time explaining very carefully to my dad that he couldn't expect me to do my math assignment because math made me feel bad about myself. In return, he suggested that maybe I should study more, and then math wouldn't make me feel so bad. But in the meantime, he said, it doesn't matter how you feel. Do your homework. Doesn't matter how I feel? What a scandalous notion. I probably should have called social services. If this self-esteem thing was just another benign form of entertainment, we could just laugh it off. But it's become a serious problem because this "I'm special, love yourself, you get points for breathing" dogma taints everything it touches. It equips you for nothing. It won't help you at school. It will stifle your career ambitions, and it will certainly wreak havoc on your relationships. Sure, insecurity and self-doubt can also be defeating, but at least there's a chance that they might drive you to be better. Self-esteem actually prevents improvement because you can only improve if you first acknowledge what you're not good at. But that process might take a toll on your self-esteem, so many people avoid it. I'm not saying that you should hate yourself, and I'm not saying that you should have low self-esteem. I'm saying have no self-esteem, as in stop thinking about it, period. Do good things with your life, and you'll have all the esteem you'll ever need. I'm Matt Walsh for Prager University.
Over the last 400 years, what power has done the most to spread the ideals of limited government, an independent judiciary, certain inalienable rights, and free markets? That power would be the British Empire. It was Britain that gave these ideals to the United States. It was the British Empire, the largest empire the world has ever known, which made these ideals global aspirations. It was the British Empire, along with America, that defended these ideals in two colossal world wars. Freedom was an Englishman's right, and wherever he went, he took that right with him, whether he was an English colonist in America, governing himself through a locally elected assembly, or an English adventurer like Sir Stamford Raffles, creating the free market city-state of Singapore, or an English officer like T.E. Lawrence, leading Arab tribesmen against the Turks. The British always thought of themselves as liberators, as bringers of freedom. The British believed the final and necessary justification of their empire was a moral one. The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest administration. And they insisted that basic moral standards were honored. The British did not try to nation build in the way we think of it now. They were under no illusions about making Arabs or Afghans or Zulus into Englishmen. They were more than content to leave people alone, to let them be themselves, to govern them with the lightest possible hand. In American history, we remember this when we think of the British Empire's so-called benign neglect. We can see it throughout the history of the British Empire. Think about the vast territory of the Sudan. It was governed by 140 British civil servants. Even Gandhi praised the British Empire, paraphrasing Jefferson, saying that he believed that the best government was the government that governed least, and that he found that the British Empire guaranteed his freedom and governed him least of all. In the defense of freedom, the empire drew moral lines. No power did more to abolish slavery and the slave trade in the modern world than did the British Empire. The British Treasury spent enormous sums to liberate slaves and compensate slave owners in the Caribbean. The Royal Navy had as a primary duty the eradication of the slave trade, and in fact, abolishing the slave trade became a major factor driving the expansion of the British Empire. The British enforced a Pax Britannica, putting down pirates, taming headhunters, and keeping the peace between previously warring tribes and religions. While respecting and often ruling through local leaders, the British still insisted on certain Judeo-Christian moral standards. They were not, in that respect, multiculturalists. They had a firm sense of right and wrong. When Sir Charles Napier was confronted by the practice of suttee, widow burning, in India, he told the Brahmin priests involved that he understood it was their custom. But the British had a custom too. They hanged men who burned women alive, and their goods were confiscated. So if the Brahmins insisted on continuing their tradition of widow burning, then he would insist on following his British tradition of hanging the murderers of widows. Widow burning in India soon ceased. But we don't have to dig far into history, into the abolition of slavery and widow burning, to find the British Empire on the side of moral right and freedom. We can think of events within our own lifetimes or those of our parents and grandparents. When we think of the two deadliest threats to freedom in the 20th century, we generally think of communism and Nazism. But how many remember that in 1940, after the Hitler-Stalin Pact and after the fall of France, one power, the British Empire, stood alone in mortal combat against the combined tyrannies of the world? Even where the British have merited criticism, as in Ireland, there is more to the imperial story. During negotiations to create the Irish Republic, for instance, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who could speak Welsh, reminded the Irish nationalist and Gaelic extremist Eamon de Valera that the Celts never had a word for republic. It was an idea given to them by the English. This is our own history, too. If you love America, you should also love the power that gave us our sense of inalienable rights, rights traceable back to Magna Carta. It all started in America with the British Empire, a great liberty-loving empire. It is the empire's legacy, the English-speaking world, that remains the great global guardian of freedom today. I'm H.W. Crocker for Prager University.
Americans carry many different forms of insurance. There's car insurance, home insurance, life insurance, even pet insurance. Most of these insurance policies work well and are fairly priced. But there is one glaring exception: health insurance. Only health insurance becomes more complicated and more expensive at the same time. So the obvious question is, why? To answer this question, we have to start at the beginning. What is insurance? It's pretty straightforward. You pay a monthly fee which provides financial protection against unforeseen, sometimes catastrophic events. People buy homeowners insurance, for example, to protect themselves from the financial loss incurred in the event of a fire, a flood, or theft. Because millions of people are paying into the insurance pool, the pool has enough money to cover the unlucky person whose house does burn down. And since insurance is meant to share risk, it only stands to reason that higher risk individuals have to pay more to be insured. Someone who has had 2 accidents is going to pay more for car insurance than someone who has never had an accident. Why? Because their track record indicates they are more likely to have another accident. But while insurance provides a bulwark against unforeseen loss, it does not protect against routine expenses. Car insurance protects you in the event that you wind up in a car wreck or your vehicle is stolen. But it doesn't cover routine maintenance like oil changes, replacing brake pads, or tire erosion. Why? Because everyone needs routine oil changes, new brake pads, and new tires. So there is no risk to protect against. Health insurance in America works very differently. Many of us have health insurance plans that aren't insurance at all. They're really prepaid healthcare plans. They cover routine checkups, less serious illnesses, and recurring expenses like prescription medications, in addition to protecting you from a health disaster. All of this has made healthcare much more expensive and complex than any other form of insurance. That is true whether you get your insurance through your employer, through the government, or if you pay for your own plan. The Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was passed on the promise that it would fix these issues and bring down healthcare costs. But it has actually made the problem much worse. First, it limited the variety of health insurance plans private companies could offer. It did this by mandating that every plan had to cover the same set of 10 health benefits, including preventive care, maternity care, mental health care, and contraception. Second, Obamacare prevented insurers from charging premiums based on the risk they were assuming. A person with a much higher risk of getting sick couldn't be charged more than a person with a much lower chance. These two aspects of Obamacare, requiring all policies to have certain coverages and not allowing insurance companies to charge more for riskier clients, caused the price of insurance to rise dramatically. In Arizona, for example, the price more than doubled between 2016 and 2017 alone. So, how do we undo this mess? By making health insurance more like, well, insurance. First, stop making people buy plans that include things they won't use and don't want. Second, allow health insurers to offer more options at different prices. Do these two things, and you'd make health insurance a lot more affordable for a lot more people. And what about people with pre-existing conditions for whom every insurance plan is just too expensive? We do what any compassionate society does. We make sure they get the medical care they need. But we don't need to upset the whole concept of insurance and make healthcare more expensive for everyone else to do it. Most Americans want to do the responsible thing and insure themselves against catastrophic healthcare emergencies. But with health insurance costs rising every year, being responsible is becoming more difficult. I'm Lan Hee Chen, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution for Prager University.
The next time you hear someone complain about capitalism, consider this. The percentage of people living at starvation-level poverty has fallen 80% since 1970. Before then, more than 1 in 4 people around the world were living on $1 a day or less. Today, it's about 1 in 20. This is the greatest anti-poverty achievement in world history. So, how did this remarkable transformation come to pass? Was it the fabulous success of the United Nations? The generosity of U.S. foreign aid? The brilliant policies of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank? Stimulus spending? Government redistribution? No. It was none of those things. It was capitalism. Billions of souls around the world have been able to pull themselves out of poverty thanks to 5 incredible innovations: globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. Globalization means the ever-increasing ability to move goods, people, and ideas from one distant location to another. Free trade is open access to markets and people from all over the world with few, if any, barriers. Property rights is ensuring that what belongs to you can't be taken away on a whim by the state. The rule of law safeguards contracts, assuring that they will be respected and lived up to whether the deal is made in Peru or Poland. And entrepreneurship is the creativity of free people to dream up new products that we never knew we wanted or needed. It's worth noting that in places like East Asia, these 5 things were all made possible by the historic peace after World War II that resulted from America's global diplomatic and military presence. Let me put this in a slightly different way. The ideals of free enterprise and global leadership, central to capitalism and American conservatism, are responsible for the greatest reduction in human misery since mankind began its long climb from the swamp to the stars. This remarkable progress has been America's gift to the world. So, if these American conservative ideals have done so much to lift up the world's poor, you'd think conservative ideas would be gaining strength every single day, everywhere. And not just gaining strength among conservatives, but also among young idealists, immigrants, minorities, and advocates for the poor, all embracing the principles of free enterprise and unleashing its power on behalf of the vulnerable. But this hasn't happened. To the contrary, capitalism is struggling to attract new followers. Indeed, some believe is destined to fade away, just as it has in much of Europe. According to a Harvard study, only 42% of young Americans 18 to 29 have a favorable view of capitalism. What explains this discrepancy between the incredible results of capitalism and its popularity? Why does capitalism get such a bad rap? One answer is simple. The defenders of free enterprise have done a terrible job of telling people how much good the system has done around the world. Capitalism has saved a couple billion people, and we have treated this miracle like a state secret. According to a 2013 survey, 84% of Americans are unaware of the progress made against poverty worldwide. Indeed, more than 2/3 think global hunger has actually gotten worse. This ignorance has consequences because there's no substitute for capitalism in the 5 innovations that make it work. Years of economic research tell us no other system comes close. Certainly not communism, not even socialism. You need a system that works while you sleep. One that creates the foundations of human prosperity without central planning or benevolent bureaucrats. More capitalism, more growth. The formula might seem deceptively simple, but it works. So how do we lift up the next billion? The answer should be clear. If you really want to help the poor, stand up for capitalism. I'm Arthur Brooks, President of the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.
Once there was a South American country with a promising future. It had a functioning democracy, a rapidly developing economy, and a growing middle class. All the important indicators, including education, healthcare, and foreign investment, were pointed in the right direction. It was far from perfect, but the mood was hopeful, and with good reason. But now all that promise is gone. The country is a failed state, a hollowed-out shell of its former self. Services like power and water are sporadic. The most basic consumer goods, from bread to toilet paper, are in chronically short supply. Crime has skyrocketed. Freedom of the press is almost non-existent. Democracy has been replaced by a virtual dictatorship. The country is, I'm sorry to say, my beloved Venezuela, a place in which my family has deep roots. I can tell you what happened to it in one word: socialism. In 1999, then candidate for president Hugo Chavez promised to lead the people of Venezuela to a socialist paradise. His theme was Esperanza y Cambio, hope and change. Venezuela is a nation of great wealth, Chavez said, but it's being stolen from its citizens by the evil capitalists and evil corporations. This wrong would be righted, he assured the voters, if they elected him. And they did, to their everlasting regret. Chavez drew inspiration from his mentor, Fidel Castro. Like his mentor, he enjoyed giving speeches that sometimes lasted as many as 7 hours. He even gave himself his own weekly television show, where he would spontaneously break into song. Here's a rule. When your nation's leader starts singing on national television, you're in trouble. Under Chavez, the government of Venezuela took over industry after industry. The government, he assured everyone, would run these businesses better than private enterprise, and the profits would be shared by the people. With great fanfare, he tore up contracts with multinational oil and gas companies and demanded that they pay much higher royalties. When they refused, he told them to leave. They did. His image was burnished by Hollywood celebrities who flocked to see the great work he was doing, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Progressive politicians from the US and Europe also praised him lavishly. Here's another rule. When Hollywood celebrities visit your country to praise your leader, you're in trouble. When the leader sings on national television and is praised by Hollywood celebrities, you're doomed. Socialism always works in the beginning, so people are fooled in the beginning. It's easy for governments to confiscate money, but eventually there's no more money to confiscate. In the case of Venezuela, I mean that literally. People who could get money out of the country did. Many left the country altogether. Nearly 2 million, according to Venezuelan sociologist Tomás Paez. The wealth creators continue to create wealth, but they created it somewhere else, Miami or Madrid, and other places around the world. When Chavez first ran for president in 1999, he said he would leave in 2 years if people weren't happy with him. But, like Castro, Chavez never had any intention of giving up power. He died in office in 2013, replaced by his vice president, Nicolás Maduro. Maduro is Chavez without the charisma or the voice. The country is now a pariah, shunned by the world and isolated. It's so bad that many international airlines refuse to fly there. People stand in lines for hours just to get food. Sometimes they walk away empty-handed. A recent survey found that 75% of Venezuelan adults lost weight in 2016, an average of 19 pounds. This national weight loss program is known cynically as the Maduro diet. Still, Maduro holds on to power. Opposition leaders and journalists who report the truth are jailed. Venezuela is a cautionary tale. Once a country goes down a socialist path, there's no easy way back. And the longer a country stays socialist, the harder it is to reform it. Venezuela has been socialist for 2 decades. If you don't think it can happen here, whether here is the United States or Europe or anywhere else, you're fooling yourself. When people get used to depending on the government, no matter how poor they remain, that dependency is hard to break. That's why you should never buy the socialist lie. Socialism is a drug, and like a drug, it feels great at first, but eventually it will ruin your country, just like it ruined Venezuela. I'm Debbie D'Souza for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. As a nonprofit, PragerU relies on donations from viewers like you. Please consider making a donation.
Progressive politicians love to talk about raising the minimum wage. It makes them sound caring, compassionate, concerned. They're on the side of the worker, standing against the greedy employer. The current call is for a national $15 an hour minimum wage, more than double the current federal rate of $7.25. A number of cities and states are already there, including New York, California, Washington, D.C., and Seattle. Others are considering it. The left casts the minimum wage debate as a war between employee and employer, but most business owners pay their workers as much as they can. Finding and keeping good people is the hardest part of any employer's job. I know. For 17 years, I ran CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Our company and franchise restaurants employed over 75,000 people. But as with most retail businesses, our profit margins were razor thin. Based on my experience, if we adopt the national minimum wage of $15, here's what will happen. 1, a lot of people will lose their jobs or have their hours reduced. According to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office study, just a $10 minimum wage would cost 500,000 jobs as businesses terminate employees. Obviously, far more jobs would be lost at $15 an hour. To survive, employers would have to reduce hours, even for workers who manage to keep their jobs. That's a pay cut. 2, businesses will close, and the jobs they created will disappear. A recent report from researchers at the Harvard Business School found that each $1 increase in the minimum wage results in a 4 to 10% increase in the likelihood of restaurants closing. An over $7 an hour increase to $15 would be devastating, not only for restaurants, but for small businesses and their employees. 3, young people will lose that entry-level job opportunity. My first job was scooping ice cream at a Baskin-Robbins in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1960s. Now, it paid just $1 an hour, but it taught me valuable lessons like the importance of showing up on time, teamwork, and presenting a happy demeanor to customers. No one can get that better job until they have their first job. 4, the cost of all workers will have to go up. If you hire a dishwasher at $15 an hour, your cooks will be unhappy with their wages. You're going to have to pay everybody more, which increases labor costs across the board. That's more pressure on profits. Too much pressure and you're out of business. 5, fewer people will open businesses. $15 an hour is a very steep hill to climb. Would-be entrepreneurs will do the math on labor costs and realize it's just not worth the risk. This is a real cost to the economy that we can't measure. A company that never exists never employs anyone. 6, prices for everything will go up as businesses pass higher labor costs along to consumers. One of two things will happen. Either consumers won't pay the higher prices and businesses will lay off workers or close, or consumers will pay higher prices and have less money to spend elsewhere. Either way, the higher minimum wage will represent a drag on the overall economy. Now, this may sound like doom and gloom, but it's already a reality for many business owners and workers in the cities and states that are raising the minimum wage. In San Francisco, AQ, a 2012 James Beard Award finalist for the best new restaurant in America, saw rising labor costs drive its profit margins down from 8.5% in 2012 to 1.5% by 2015. So it shut the doors. Jeremy Marin's chain of Cuban restaurants in New York closed 2 locations because of minimum wage increases and has raised prices at the restaurants he's still operating. The minimum wage, he said, is going up too fast. We can't catch our breath. Kevin McNamee is a chiropractor in California. I'll be moving my 2 companies out of Los Angeles, he wrote in a letter to the New York Times. When the city compels me to pay employees $15 an hour, it comes out of my pocket. Last year, my employees made more than I did. Now, these stories are already all too common. Expect them to become more so as cities and states pile on the $15 minimum wage bandwagon. So, if a $15 minimum wage doesn't help workers and doesn't help employers, who exactly does it help? Well, maybe just the progressive politicians who manage to mislead voters into believing that it's the right thing to do. Sounding caring, compassionate, and concerned is all well and good, but having a job is better. I'm Andy Puzder for Prager University. PragerU teaches what isn't taught. This video is just one example. Please consider making a donation. It matters.
Historically, education in the United States has been split between private schools and traditional public schools. However, this dynamic changed in 1991 when Minnesota passed the first law establishing charter schools in the state. Since then, a majority of states have some kind of charter school system. But what exactly is a charter school? Charter schools offer education ranging in grades K through 12 without charge to students. Charter schools are funded with tax dollars, but are generally subject to fewer rules and regulations than traditional public schools, and they usually receive less public funds per pupil than public schools. Charter school students typically take the same state-required standardized tests as public school students. Depending on state law, these schools can be started by parents, teachers, nonprofit groups, corporations, or even government organizations. Charter schools may focus on specific skills and subjects like math or science, or may be aimed at students who require alternative learning methods, such as teaching lessons that use visual or more hands-on approaches. But these entities just can't start one whenever they please. They must first obtain authorization from either the school district, city, or state, depending on how the charter school laws are structured. And the charter school model has achieved various levels of success. Over the past 25 years, the number of charter schools in the U.S. has skyrocketed, forcing more competition and faster improvement among existing public and private schools. As of 2016, there are almost 7,000 charter schools serving 3 million students. And since 2000, charter school enrollment has increased by 600%. But as charter schools have become more popular, opposition has grown. Teachers' unions and other public school activists argue that charter schools take money away from traditional public schools. However, it's unfair to hold minority parents and students hostage in underperforming public schools. Overall, charter schools have provided an entrepreneurial challenge to the status quo and delivered results that make it worth expanding this option for parents. According to a 2015 Stanford study, not only do charter schools provide significantly higher levels of growth in math and reading for all students, but minority and low-income students benefit disproportionately more. Charter schools are becoming a bigger part of the U.S. education system every year, and for millions of American families, they offer a much-needed choice that's different than a one-size-fits-all public school. Every other sector of the American economy has benefited from the ability to compete and improve. Why not education?